Welcome to Crossdressing Stories. Here, we share personal stories, celebrate self-expression. If you're on your own journey or simply curious, you've found your community. Subscribe and join the conversation.
Did he just turn into a girl in front of me? The voice. I think it was Megan's. Cut through the humid afternoon air. Sharp and incredulous. It sliced through my own disbelief. The sound that confirmed the impossible was, in fact, happening. It all started so simply, so perfectly normal for a summer at Camp Clearwater. My best friends, Mark and Dave, and I had just led our team to a messy, sweat-soaked victory in the annual airsoft tournament. Mark, ever the boisterous one, was still recounting his heroic final stand, while Dave, the calm anchor of our trio, just offered a quiet, knowing smile. Adrenaline was still thrumming through my veins, a heady cocktail of victory and teenage confidence. It was that feeling, that stupid, brilliant courage, that made me do it. I saw them sitting on the porch of the girls' cabin, Hattie, Zoe, Megan, and Rachel laughing, their hair catching the golden light. Without a second thought, I broke away from my friends and jogged over, my heart thumping a new, unfamiliar rhythm against my ribs. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, like my insides weren't a tangled mess of nerves. We were all heading down to the lake for a swim to cool off. "You guys should come." Hattie, who always seemed to carry an aura of gentle authority, smiled. "Best offer we've had all day." "Alan, we'll grab our stuff." Success. It tasted sweet. I gave them a triumphant grin and turned to rejoin Mark and Dave, who were giving me a series of exaggerated congratulatory gestures. The walk back to our cabin to change should have taken 3 minutes. It felt like a lifetime. It began as an itch, a strange, prickling sensation under my skin, starting in my fingertips and toes. I dismissed it as a heat rash, a side effect of running around in tactical gear all afternoon, but the itch deepened, transforming into a warm, buzzing hum that vibrated through my bones. I stumbled, catching myself on the railing of our cabin steps. "Whoa, you okay?" Man Dave asked, his brow furrowed with concern. "Yeah, just dizzy." I managed, but the word felt foreign in my mouth. The buzzing intensified, a current of electricity rewriting me from the inside out. I felt a strange pulling sensation in my chest, a tightening around my waist. My worn-out sneakers suddenly felt loose, my feet seeming to shrink within them. My whole frame felt like it was contracting, pulling inward. A wave of vertigo washed over me as my perspective shifted, the world seeming to grow slightly larger around me. My shoulders, usually broad from years of swimming, felt like they were narrowing, softening. I clutched at my stomach, a dull ache spreading through my abdomen, a feeling so alien I couldn't even begin to process it. "Alan, what's happening to you?" Mark's voice was strained, the usual joking tone replaced with raw panic. I couldn't answer. I could only watch. A horrified passenger in my own body. My cargo shorts, once snug on my hips, slid down, pooling around my ankles. My t-shirt hung on me like a tent. The most shocking change was my hair. I felt a cascade of something soft and heavy tumbling down my back, tickling my neck. I reached up, my hand trembling, and my fingers tangled in thick, wavy strands of brown hair that fell well past my shoulders. My own short, buzzed cut was gone. My throat constricted, and when I tried to gasp for air, the sound that escaped was not my own. It was a high, breathy whimper, a sound I'd never made before. The transformation was violent in its speed, but strangely painless, just a profound, overwhelming sense of dislocation. It was like my body was a clay sculpture being rapidly and expertly reshaped by an invisible artist. By the time the girls came around the corner, chattering excitedly, the final wave of change was washing over me. The buzzing faded, leaving behind a profound stillness. I stood there, lost in a sea of oversized fabric, my world tilted on its axis. The laughter died in their throats. 4 pairs of eyes widened, their conversation halting mid-sentence. They stared, not at the triumphant Alan who had invited them to the lake, but at the slender, bewildered figure standing in his place. And then Megan's voice broke the silence, uttering the words that hung in the air, the question that echoed the frantic screaming inside my own head. Did he just turn into a girl in front of me? Silence. A thick, heavy blanket of it fell over our small group. Even the chirping crickets seemed to have gone quiet, as if holding their breath. I was frozen, my mind a blank slate of pure, unadulterated shock. My friends, my own friends, were looking at me with the same stunned horror. I was a spectacle, a freak show that had erupted in the middle of a perfectly normal Tuesday. The shame was a physical force, a hot wave that washed over my new, sensitive skin. I wanted the ground to swallow me whole, to simply cease to exist. My hand, smaller and more delicate than I remembered, rose shakily to my face. The skin my fingertips met was impossibly soft, smooth, and devoid of the faint stubble that had been a morning ritual for the past year. The sensation was so alien it felt like I was touching a stranger. My fingers traced the line of a jaw that felt less angular, cheeks that felt fuller. My gaze fell, and through the gaping collar of my t-shirt, I could see the distinct, soft swell of a chest I did not recognize. A small, terrified sound escaped my lips. It was Hattie who moved first. She always had this remarkable composure, an ability to assess a crisis and act while the rest of us were still reeling. She walked toward me slowly, her eyes not filled with fear or disgust, but with a startling amount of compassion. "Alan," she asked softly. The name felt wrong. It hung in the air between us, a label for someone who no longer seemed to exist. I just shook my head, unable to form words. My body was trembling, a leaf caught in a storm. The oversized clothes felt absurd, a costume from a life I'd been wearing only minutes before. "Okay," Hattie said, her voice calm and steady. She took another step closer. "Okay, we need to. Let's get you something to wear. You can't go to the lake like this." It was such a practical thought in the midst of utter insanity, and it was enough to break the paralysis gripping the others. Zoe, Megan, and Rachel exchanged wide-eyed, frantic glances before nodding in unison. "Our cabin," Rachel whispered. "Come on." Hattie gently took my arm. Her touch was warm, grounding, as I took a clumsy step, my own shorts, now completely unmoored from my narrower hips, fell to the ground, leaving me standing in a giant t-shirt and my boxer shorts. A fresh wave of humiliation crashed over me, and my face burned with a heat so intense I thought I might faint. Without a word, Hattie slipped off the light flannel she had tied around her waist and wrapped it around my own, knotting the sleeves securely. It was a small gesture, but it felt monumental, an act of kindness that kept me from completely shattering. Inside their cabin, the air was thick with the scent of floral perfume and hairspray. It was a foreign territory I had only ever glimpsed from the doorway. They guided me to sit on the edge of a bed, and I felt impossibly small. "I have a spare bikini," Hattie said, rummaging through a duffel bag. "It might be a little big in the top, but it's better than nothing." She handed me 2 small pieces of dark blue fabric. I stared at them, my mind struggling to comprehend the task. This was swimwear. For girls. For me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold on to the thin straps. "We'll give you some privacy," Zoe said, her voice barely a whisper, and shepherded the others outside, closing the door softly behind them. Alone. I slowly peeled off my massive t-shirt. The movement was awkward, unfamiliar. My arms were slender, my shoulders delicate, and my chest, there was no denying it, small, sensitive breasts had formed, and the sight sent another jolt of panic through me. I fumbled with the bikini top, my fingers clumsy on the clasp. After several failed attempts, I finally managed to click it into place. The fabric was snug, the band tight against my ribs. The thin straps felt like delicate threads on my shoulders. I pulled on the bottoms, and they settled onto my hips with a bizarre sense of rightness, fitting my new curves perfectly. I stood there, clad in nothing but a women's bathing suit, and stared down at myself. This body was a mystery. It was mine. I could feel it, but I didn't know it. As I stood there, lost in this sea of confusion, something flickered in the back of my mind. It wasn't a thought. Exactly. It was more like a half-remembered dream. A flash of a little girl with pigtails, scraping her knee on the sidewalk. A memory of trying on my mother's heels and clomping around the living room. These weren't my memories. They couldn't be. And yet, they felt familiar. They felt like mine. With these fragmented images, a name surfaced, bubbling up from some deep, unknown part of my consciousness. It wasn't spoken. It was felt. A soft, gentle whisper in my soul. "Eliza." When Hattie knocked softly and re-entered the room, she found me standing by the window, staring out at the trees. "How are you doing?" she asked. I turned to face her. The panic had receded, replaced by a strange, fragile calm. I took a breath, the first one that felt like it truly filled my new lungs. I think my name is Eliza," I said, and the name felt as natural on my tongue as the high, clear voice that spoke it. Hattie didn't question it. She just gave me a small, supportive smile that was more comforting than any words could have been. It's a beautiful name. Eliza. The others came back in, their expressions a mixture of awe and apprehension. I could see the questions teeming behind their eyes, but for now, they held them back. The introduction of a new name seemed to provide a temporary anchor in the swirling chaos. I was no longer the bizarre transformation of Alan. I was Eliza, a new person they were meeting for the first time. The walk to the lake was a surreal experience. Each step felt different. My center of gravity had shifted, my hips swaying with a natural rhythm I didn't have to think about. I was acutely aware of the air on my skin, the feeling of the sun on my bare shoulders. It was as if all my senses had been turned up to 11. When we arrived, Mark and Dave were waiting, skipping stones across the water, their anxiety palpable. They saw us approach, and their jaws went slack. Dave's eyes widened, while Mark just stared, his mouth opening and closing silently. Hattie stepped forward. "This is Eliza," she said simply, as if introducing a visiting cousin. Dave recovered first. "Eliza," he repeated, testing the name. He looked at me, truly looked at me. and a flicker of understanding crossed his face. He saw the same terrified person from the cabin, just in a different form. He offered a small, hesitant smile. Mark, on the other hand, just ran a hand through his hair, looking utterly bewildered. To break the tension, Zoe grabbed a volleyball. Well, are we going to swim or just stand here all day? The water was a shock, cool and refreshing against my skin. It felt incredible. My body, which had felt so awkward on land, moved with a surprising grace in the water. I was lighter, more buoyant. We splashed around, the initial awkwardness slowly melting away under the warm sun and the familiar joy of a summer afternoon. Later, we started a clumsy game of volleyball. At first, every movement felt calculated and strange. When I jumped to spike the ball, I was aware of the jiggle in my chest, the way the bikini top held me. When I dove for a save, I landed with less force, my limbs more flexible. A blush crept up my neck every time I had to adjust the bikini bottoms. But as the game wore on, something shifted. I started laughing, a genuine, bubbling laugh that came from my gut. I was having fun. The raw fear was still there, lurking beneath the surface. But for these few hours, it was muffled by the simple pleasure of friendship. After our swim, as we sat on the grassy bank drying off, Rachel dug through her oversized beach bag. "You can't walk back in that flannel," she said, pulling out a folded piece of fabric. "Here, this should fit." She handed me a simple sundress. It was a beautiful shade of seafoam green, with thin spaghetti straps and a soft, flowing skirt. I took it hesitantly, the cotton feeling impossibly soft against my fingertips. I slipped it on over my damp bikini, and the sensation made me gasp. The fabric skimmed over my skin, light as a feather. A gentle breeze picked up, and the skirt billowed around my legs, a feeling so utterly new and feminine that it sent a shiver through me. My face flushed a deep red. I felt exposed, vulnerable, and yet pretty. It was a word I had never in my life associated with myself. My inner turmoil was a quiet storm. The panic hadn't vanished. It had just retreated, replaced by a profound and dizzying confusion. But underneath it all, a tiny, persistent thought kept surfacing. A thought I was almost too scared to acknowledge. This felt right. Terrifyingly. Impossibly. This felt more right than anything I had ever known. As Hattie made a silly joke, and I found myself laughing along with the others, I realized it was the first time I had smiled all day without it feeling like a mask. "Okay. Operation Eliza is officially a go," Megan announced with a dramatic flair once we were back in the girls' cabin. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, orange shadows across the room. My sundress was still slightly damp, clinging to my skin in a way that was a constant reminder of my new reality. "What does that mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "It means you need to see yourself," Hattie said gently. "Really see yourself." Before I could protest, I was seated in front of a small vanity mirror cluttered with an arsenal of brushes, tubes, and compacts I didn't recognize. My heart began to pound against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of anticipation and dread. I had actively avoided looking at my reflection since the change. I was terrified of the stranger I would see staring back. "We're not going to do much," Rachel assured me, picking up a tube of lip gloss. "Just a little something to make you feel more settled." Zoe began to gently towel dry my long hair, her movements careful and soothing. The feeling of someone else tending to my hair was intimate and strangely comforting. Rachel applied a slick of pale pink gloss to my lips. The fruity scent filled my nostrils. Megan, with a surprisingly steady hand, took an eyelash curler, a terrifying metal contraption, and gently crimped my lashes, making my eyes feel wide and open. She followed it with a single, light coat of mascara. "Okay," Hattie said. Her voice soft. She had been quietly brushing my hair, untangling the knots from our swim. She now gathered a few strands from the front and secured them at the back of my head with a small clip. "You can look now." I took a deep, shaky breath and lifted my eyes to the mirror. The person staring back at me wasn't Alan. It wasn't even the terrified creature from a few hours ago. The girl in the mirror was pretty. She had wide, dark eyes fringed with thick lashes, a small, straight nose, and soft, full lips that glistened with a hint of pink. Her high cheekbones were flushed from the sun, and her long, wavy brown hair framed her face, making it look delicate and heart-shaped. She looked familiar, like a sister I never knew I had, but she was also a complete stranger. And she was me. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. A choked sob escaped my throat. This was it. This was real. This face. This body. It was mine. The shock was immense. A tidal wave of emotion that left me breathless. There was fear. A deep, primal fear of the unknown. Of the life I had lost. But underneath it, blossoming like a fragile flower after a storm, was a flicker of something else. A dizzying, terrifying thrill. A sense of wonder. A whisper of happiness. Tears welled in my eyes and began to stream down my cheeks. "This? Is this really me?" I whispered, my voice cracking. I felt a warm hand on my shoulder. Hattie was standing behind me, her reflection next to mine in the mirror. She didn't offer empty platitudes or tell me it would be okay. She just squeezed my shoulder, a silent promise of support. "Yes," she said, her voice full of a conviction I didn't yet possess. "This is you, Eliza." Seeing her reflection next to mine, seeing the unwavering friendship in her eyes, I felt a tiny anchor drop in the swirling sea of my emotions. I wasn't alone in this. I looked back at the girl in the mirror, my reflection, and for the first time, I didn't just see a stranger. I saw a glimmer of myself. That evening, the entire camp gathered for the weekly bonfire. The thought of it had filled me with a paralyzing dread all afternoon. Facing my friends was one thing. Facing the entire camp, 100 other teenagers who knew me as Alan, was another. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to hide, to stay in the cabin until this nightmare was over. But Hattie, Zoe, Megan, and Rachel wouldn't hear of it. They formed a protective circle around me as we walked toward the crackling fire, the sounds of laughter and music growing louder with every step. I was still wearing the seafoam green sundress, and I clutched a borrowed cardigan around myself like a shield. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard, I was sure everyone could see it. I kept my head down, my long hair falling forward to hide my face, convinced that every eye was on me. We found a spot on one of the log benches, and my new friends sat close. A silent wall of support. I stared into the dancing flames, trying to will myself invisible. It didn't work. "Hey, guys, there you are." I flinched at the familiar voice. Mark and Dave were approaching, their faces illuminated by the firelight. This was it. The real test. My stomach twisted into a painful knot. They stopped in front of our bench. Mark's eyes scanned our group and then landed on me. He squinted, a look of confusion on his face. Dave, however, looked directly at me, his expression unreadable. So, Mark began, a slow, mischievous grin spreading across his face. He nudged Dave with his elbow. This is the famous Eliza we've been hearing about. My head snapped up. I stared at him, bewildered. He let out a loud, booming laugh, though it lacked any real malice. He came over and sat down next to me, clapping me on the shoulder with a force that almost sent me tumbling off the bench. It was a gesture he'd made 1,000 times to Alan. Coming from him now, directed at Eliza, it was jarring, but also profoundly reassuring. "Look," he said, his voice dropping to a more serious tone. "I'm not going to pretend my brain isn't doing backflips right now. This is weird. But," he looked from me to Dave and back again. "You're still you, right? Whether you're Alan or Eliza, you're still our friend. So, we're cool." Dave nodded in agreement, a quiet smile on his face. He's right. We're good. Relief washed over me so powerfully, my knees felt weak. I hadn't realized how much I'd been bracing for rejection, for mockery. To receive this simple, unhesitating acceptance from the two people who had been my brothers for years. It meant everything. A watery, grateful smile touched my lips. "Thanks. Guys," I whispered. As the night wore on, I began to relax. Mark and Dave's easy acceptance set the tone. No one else seemed to pay me much mind. Assuming I was just a new camper, I found myself drawn into the conversation, my voice still quiet, but my presence less fearful. At one point, a boy from one of the senior cabins, a tall, handsome guy named Ben that I vaguely knew, came over to talk to Rachel. His eyes, however, kept drifting to me. "I don't think we've met," he said, smiling a charming, practiced smile. "I'm Ben. This is Eliza," Hattie supplied, her tone friendly but protective. "Eliza," he repeated, his smile widening. "That's a really pretty name. You have a really nice smile. You know that." My face erupted in flames. I had no idea what to do. Boys didn't talk to me like this. They didn't look at me like this. I was used to being one of the guys, trading insults and roughhousing. This polite, flirtatious attention was a foreign language. I mumbled a thank you and immediately looked down at my hands, my heart fluttering in my chest with a strange mix of panic and something else. A tiny, unfamiliar thrill. Ben eventually moved on, but the moment stuck with me. The world was already starting to treat me differently. It was terrifying, but it was also a confirmation. I wasn't just Alan in a different body. I was Eliza, a girl, and for the first time, sitting there by the fire, surrounded by friends both new and old. That thought didn't feel like the end of the world. It felt like the beginning of one. I woke to the unfamiliar sensation of long hair tickling my face. For a fleeting, disoriented moment, I didn't know where I was. Then, the memories of the previous day crashed down on me. The transformation, the lake, the mirror, the campfire. It wasn't a dream. I sat up, the thin blanket pooling around my new waist. The girls had insisted I take the spare bunk in their cabin, arguing it was safer than me trying to explain my existence to my own cabin mates. In the soft morning light, I looked down at my hands, my slender arms, the curve of my hips. It felt less like a costume now. The profound shock was giving way to a strange, quiet sense of normalcy. This body was beginning to feel like my own. I reached up and gathered my hair, pulling it back from my face. My fingers moved with an instinct I didn't know I possessed, expertly twisting the strands into a messy ponytail. A small, surprised laugh escaped my lips. It was such a simple, mundane act, but it felt like a tiny victory. Another piece of the Eliza puzzle clicking into place. Morning. Sleepyhead. Hattie's voice came from the bunk below. She was already dressed, lacing up her hiking boots. The reality of our situation quickly set in. We couldn't hide forever. The camp counselors would start asking questions. Where was Alan? Who was this new girl? We need a story, Zoe said, voicing everyone's thoughts as she rummaged for a clean t-shirt. Something believable. We spent the next half hour brainstorming. It was Rachel who came up with the winning idea. We'll say you're Alan's cousin, she declared. Eliza, your family dropped you off late last night to surprise him, but he had a family emergency and had to leave super early this morning, before anyone was awake. He asked us to look after you. It was thin, but it was plausible enough to deflect any immediate, serious questions. The camp's administration was notoriously lax. As long as I didn't cause any trouble, they likely wouldn't look too closely. The plan gave me a sliver of security, a social shield to hide behind while I figured out my life. The next challenge was clothing. I couldn't live in a sundress and a bikini. The girls descended upon their wardrobes with a determined energy, pulling out items for me to try. The experience was a dizzying whirlwind of fabrics and styles. I felt a familiar blush creep up my neck as I stood in my borrowed pajamas while they assessed my new form. You're about my size, but your shoulders are a bit narrower, Hattie mused, holding a t-shirt up against me. They finally settled on a simple outfit for the day, a pair of Hattie's dark wash denim shorts and a soft, pale yellow t-shirt from Zoe that was just snug enough to hint at the curves beneath without being revealing. The shorts were the biggest revelation. I had spent my entire life in baggy cargo shorts and athletic pants. The feeling of denim fitting snugly against my thighs and hips was completely new. When I walked, I felt the fabric move with me, a constant, subtle reminder of my new shape. My stride felt different, shorter, more fluid. I caught myself watching my reflection in the cabin window, fascinated by the way my hips swayed gently with each step. It wasn't an intentional or learned movement. It was simply how this body moved. The shorts rode up slightly as I walked, and I had to resist the urge to constantly pull them down, my old modesty warring with a new, strange comfort. Standing in front of the mirror, dressed in simple, casual girls' clothes, I looked normal. I looked like any other girl at camp. The thought was both a comfort and a fresh shock to my system. I was blending in. The ghost of Alan was fading, and Eliza was becoming more solid, more real, with every passing moment. That afternoon's activity was a guided rock climbing session on the granite cliffs at the far end of the lake. In my old life, this would have been my element. I'd always been strong, athletic, able to power my way up any obstacle. Now, I wasn't so sure. You don't have to do this if you don't want to, Dave said, appearing at my side as we were getting fitted for harnesses. He had been quietly observant all morning, a silent, steady presence that I found incredibly grounding. No, I want to, I said, surprising myself with my own conviction. A part of me needed to know what this new body was capable of. Getting into the harness was an ordeal. The instructor, a burly man named Gus, had to help me, his calloused hands briefly brushing against my hips and waist as he tightened the straps. My face burned with embarrassment, but Gus was completely professional, his focus purely on safety. The harness sat low on my hips, the leg loops snug around my thighs. It felt even more restrictive than the shorts, every strap and buckle a stark reminder of the body it was cinched around. When it was my turn to climb, I approached the rock face with a churning mix of determination and anxiety. I took my first hold. my smaller hands finding a decent grip. I pulled myself up and immediately felt the difference. The raw, upper body strength I had always relied on just wasn't there. My muscles strained, and for a terrifying second, I thought I was going to fall. "Use your legs," Hattie called from below. "It's all in the legs." Her voice cut through my panic. I looked down, found a foothold, and pushed up. It worked. My legs, while not as powerful as they used to be, seemed to have a new nimbleness. My body was lighter, more flexible. I couldn't muscle my way up the cliff, so I had to be smarter, more deliberate. I had to find a rhythm, shifting my weight, using momentum, trusting my balance in a way I never had before. It was a slow, arduous process. My muscles screamed, and sweat slicked my palms. But with every foot I gained, a new feeling began to bloom in my chest. It wasn't the cocky confidence of Alan, who would have raced to the top. This was a deeper, more hard-won sense of accomplishment. I was doing this, as Eliza. When my hand finally closed over the top ledge, a wave of pure, exhilarating triumph washed over me. I pulled myself onto the summit and lay on the warm rock, gasping for breath, my body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline. Below me, I could hear cheering. I pushed myself into a sitting position and looked down. My friends, Hattie, Zoe, Rachel, Megan, Mark, and Dave were all looking up, their faces beaming. "You did it!" Eliza Mark yelled, his voice echoing across the cliff face. A wide, genuine grin spread across my face. I stood up, unsteady on my feet, and raised my arms above my head in a gesture of victory. At that moment, standing on top of the world with the wind whipping my long hair around my face, I wasn't scared. I wasn't confused. For the first time since the transformation, I felt powerful. I felt proud. It was a confidence that didn't come from brute strength or old habits. It came from this new body, this new self, and the incredible, terrifying, wonderful discovery of what I was capable of. The view from the top was breathtaking, but it was nothing compared to the view I suddenly had of my own future. It was unknown, yes, but for the first time, it also felt full of possibility. 2 days later, our group decided to take the long hike to Whisperwind Falls, a secluded waterfall hidden deep in the camp's surrounding woods. The day was warm and bright, and a sense of easy camaraderie had settled over us. The Allen's cousin story had worked perfectly, and I was now just Eliza, the new girl who was surprisingly good at volleyball and had conquered the climbing wall. I wore a simple athletic tank top and a pair of running shorts, an outfit that felt practical and blessedly comfortable. I was getting used to the different ways clothes felt and moved on my body, the way a tank top's straps sat on my newly delicate shoulders, the freedom of movement in shorts designed for a woman's hips. We walked for over an hour, the conversation flowing easily around me. I found myself talking more, laughing more, the tight knot of anxiety in my stomach finally beginning to unwind. The waterfall was more beautiful than I could have imagined. Water cascaded down a sheer rock face into a crystal-clear pool below. The sound a constant, soothing roar. We all stripped down to our swimsuits. I was in the same blue bikini, which now felt much less alien, and plunged into the icy water. After the initial shock, the cold was invigorating. I swam out to the middle of the pool and floated on my back, letting the current gently turn me. The sun was warm on my face. The sound of the falls filled my ears. And for a moment, the world and all its complications simply melted away. There was only the water, the sun, and the feeling of my own light body being held by the cool embrace of the pool. Later, while the others were exploring a small cave behind the waterfall. I found myself alone by the edge of the pool. The water was perfectly still, a flawless mirror reflecting the sky, the trees, and my own face. I knelt at the edge and looked down. The girl who looked back at me was the same one from the vanity mirror, but different. Her hair was wet and slicked back, her face free of any makeup, her expression serene. I stared into her, my eyes, for a long time. The ghost of Alan was gone. I searched for him, for some trace of the boy I used to be, but I couldn't find him. There was no flicker of his features, no echo of his presence. There was only her, only Eliza. And I realized I wasn't sad. I wasn't mourning. A profound sense of peace settled over me, a quiet, solid acceptance that went deeper than anything I had felt before. This wasn't a temporary state. This wasn't a phase or a curse. This was just me. It's really something, isn't it? I looked up to see Dave settling onto the rock beside me. He wasn't looking at the waterfall. He was looking at me, his expression thoughtful. I was so scared, I admitted. The confession coming out in a whisper. I thought my life was over. I think we all were, he said honestly. But watching you, it's been strange. Good strange. You seem happier. I considered his words. Was I happier? My old life had been good, simple, but there had always been a quiet, undefined restlessness in me, a feeling of not quite fitting in my own skin that I had never had the words for. That feeling was gone. I feel whole, I said, the word tasting true and right on my tongue. Like a part of me that was always missing has finally clicked into place. Dave nodded, tossing a small pebble into the water, watching the ripples disturb my reflection. You know, he said, his voice quiet and sincere, watching you go through this, seeing you just become you, it's made me think about how we just accept things as they are, how we get put into these boxes. Boy, girl, jock, nerd, whatever. You just stepped out of your box and into a new one. And the world didn't end. It's made me realize there are more possibilities than I thought. His words were a gift. My bizarre, personal journey had somehow opened a door for him. 2. We sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, watching the water. 2 friends sharing a moment of quiet understanding at the edge of the world. The roar of the waterfall was a powerful, constant hum, and for the first time, my soul felt just as peaceful, just as steady, and just as sure of its own course. The final week of camp was dominated by preparations for the annual talent show, a hallowed tradition of questionable skits and heartfelt acoustic guitar performances. I had fully intended to be a supportive audience member and nothing more. Hattie, Megan, and Zoe had other plans. Absolutely not, I said, shaking my head as they cornered me after breakfast. I don't dance. I have, 4 left feet. You don't have to dance, Zoe insisted. It's a simple routine. We're doing a lip-sync number to that big pop song from the beginning of the summer. It'll be fun. They were relentless. They pleaded. They flattered. They bribed me with the promise of extra dessert rations. Eventually, worn down by their collective enthusiasm, I caved. Practice sessions were held in the disused arts and crafts cabin. They were a chaotic mix of clumsy steps and explosive laughter. I was as awkward as I'd predicted, constantly turning left when everyone else turned right. But I was having fun. It was freeing to be so silly, to not care about looking cool. During a break, while the girls were arguing over a particular dance move. I was humming the melody of the song to myself. Without thinking, I started singing the words aloud, my voice soft and hesitant. The argument stopped. The three of them turned to stare at me. "Whoa," Megan said, her eyes wide. "Where did that come from?" What I asked, my face flushing. "Your voice," Hattie said, a slow smile spreading across her face. "Eliza, you can actually sing. Like, really sing." And so, the plan changed. It was no longer a lip-sync routine. It was now a full-blown musical performance. With me on lead vocals. The idea terrified me. But it also sent a thrill of excitement through my veins. The night of the show arrived in a blur of nervous energy. Our costumes were a collaborative effort, sparkly silver tank tops and black leggings. Rachel, a budding fashionista, had added a flourish for me ashort. Floaty black skirt made of tulle that went over the leggings. When I put it on, I stared at my reflection, mesmerized. The skirt puffed out slightly at my hips, making my waist look smaller. The glittery top caught the light. I looked like a pop star. A wave of shyness washed over me. But underneath it was that now familiar feeling, the secret, giddy delight of feeling beautiful. As we were waiting backstage, the noise of the crowd, a dull roar on the other side of the curtain. Hattie turned to me. Her own face was flushed with excitement, her eyes sparkling. "Hey," she said, her voice a little softer than usual. "After this, for the final campfire, they always play music, and people kind of dance." I nodded, my heart starting to beat a little faster. "I was wondering," she continued, suddenly finding the scuffed floor fascinating, "if you'd want to be my partner for that to hang out." The air left my lungs. My mind went completely blank. Hattie, the first person to show me kindness, my constant supporter, my best friend in this new life. She was asking me to be her partner. My face felt like it was on fire, and a strange, fluttering sensation erupted in my stomach, like 1,000 butterflies had just been released. "Yeah," I managed to squeak out, my voice an octave higher than usual. "Yes, I'd love that." Her face broke into a radiant smile, and the warmth of it was more dazzling than any stage light. Just then, the stage manager called our names. It was time. As I walked toward the stage, my earlier fear was gone, replaced by a dizzying, joyful energy. The thought of singing for 100 people was no longer terrifying. All I could think about was the dance afterward, and the girl with the sparkling eyes who would be waiting for me. The stage lights were blindingly hot and white. For a moment, standing there, I couldn't see anything but bright spots. I could feel the presence of the audience, a vast, anonymous sea of people, and the old, familiar panic began to claw its way up my throat. I felt a small hand slip into mine and squeeze. It was Hattie, giving me a quick, reassuring smile before she and the others took their positions behind me. Then, the opening chords of the music filled the auditorium. It was a sound we had practiced to for days, and the familiarity of it was a lifeline. I took a deep, shaky breath, closed my eyes, and let the music wash over me. The first verse began, and I opened my mouth. The voice that came out was clear and strong, more powerful than it had been in our practices. It filled the space, soaring over the music. The moment the first note left my lips, the fear vanished. It was like a switch had been flipped. My body, which had been rigid with stage fright, suddenly relaxed. I opened my eyes and saw the audience. They weren't a terrifying monster. They were just kids, counselors, my friends. All their faces turned toward the stage. I saw Mark and Dave in the third row, their faces masks of stunned disbelief that slowly morphed into wide, proud grins. I saw Rachel and Megan and Zoe dancing behind me, their movements filled with joy. My body started to move with the rhythm, no longer a clumsy collection of limbs, but a fluid, expressive whole. I wasn't thinking about the steps. I was just feeling the music. A pure, unadulterated happiness bubbled up inside me. So potent, it felt like it might lift me off the ground. This wasn't Alan singing karaoke. This wasn't a girl pretending to be a performer. This was just me, Eliza, sharing a piece of my soul. And it felt more natural than breathing. When the final note faded, a split second of absolute silence hung in the air. Then, the auditorium erupted. The applause wasn't just polite, it was a roar, a tidal wave of sound that washed over me. So loud and powerful, it felt like a physical force. People were on their feet, cheering, whistling. I stood there, breathless, blinking against the lights. A huge, unrestrained smile plastered across my face. In that moment, there were no more questions, no more doubts, no more fear. The last lingering ghosts of my old life, finally, peacefully, faded away. I wasn't a boy who had become a girl. I wasn't a strange phenomenon. I am Eliza. This is who I am. The thought wasn't a question or a revelation. It was a simple, profound statement of fact, as solid and real as the stage beneath my feet. Later that night, the entire camp gathered around a final, magnificent bonfire. A speaker played soft music, and couples were beginning to pair off, swaying gently in the firelight. I found Hattie by the edge of the clearing, away from the main crowd. "You were amazing," she said, her voice full of genuine awe. "We were amazing," I corrected her, a happy blush warming my cheeks. An awkward, hopeful silence fell between us. The song changed to a slower melody. Hattie held out her hand. "May I have this dance? Miss Eliza," she asked, a playful glint in her eyes. I took her hand, my fingers lacing through hers. "You may." She led me into the flickering orange light, and we began to move together. A simple, shuffling dance. She rested her hands on my waist, and I tentatively put mine on her shoulders. We were close, so close I could feel the warmth radiating from her skin and see the reflection of the flames dancing in her eyes. It felt safe. It felt perfect. This was the end of a summer I never could have imagined. But it was also the undeniable beginning of everything else. My journey was far from over. There were parents to talk to, a world outside of camp to navigate, but, for the first time, I wasn't scared, surrounded by the warmth of the fire, held by a friend who had seen me through the impossible. I felt a deep, unwavering sense of peace. My name is Eliza, and my life was just beginning.